Good Friday, everyone. This is Pastor Daniel McKee. It is so good to see you. I'm so glad you tuned in. We're going to pick up in our series, What Now? What do you do now? You stand. If we'll stand for the right things at the right time, for the right reasons, we can change things. And so we're going to talk about taking a stand today. We've talked about standing out, standing up, and today we're going to talk about standing strong. As you can see, we're at the Courthouse Restaurant in Gloucester, Virginia. And so this Courthouse Restaurant is the restaurant we are going to support this week. So here's what we're going to do. On September 22nd, at lunchtime, September 22nd, we're going to gather here and we're going to enjoy lunch at the Courthouse Restaurant. And if you don't have time to make it out, I just want you to come and support this local restaurant sometime this week. I appreciate each and every one of you for supporting our local restaurant. So we're going to pick up in chapter 6 of Daniel. Do you know how old Daniel was in chapter 6? He is 80 years old in chapter 6, okay? So what's happening in the Babylonian culture is this. There's a new sheriff in town. His name is Darius. And he appoints 120 satraps. That is a strange word, but basically they're just administrators. There are 3 top administrators, and Daniel is one of those top administrators. Each administrator is responsible for 40 satraps. Well, Daniel has set himself apart from all the rest of the administrators, and Darius wants to give him control over all of them. So basically, Daniel is going to be over the whole kingdom, okay? And now this particular instance will show how you need to stand strong in the midst of this. I want to give you 3 truths to help you stand strong out of this story in Daniel chapter 6. First one is this: when God raises you up, expect people to tear you down. Now listen to me for a moment. When God raises you up, expect people to try to tear you down. I was on YouTube the other day and saw this Japanese game that is called the Man of War. It's basically a capture the flag kind of game. All right, so basically there's a pole, there's 150 people protecting the pole. The object of the game is that one of your teammates has to be on top of that pole. The other team has 2 minutes to come and knock you down. And it is wild, the action associated with that game. And as I was watching that, I was like, you know what? That's kind of like how it is, isn't it? When God raises you up, people try to tear you down. And this is what happens in the life of Daniel. When Darius promotes Daniel, then they start conspiring against him to tear him down. So let's pick it up in verse 4. It says, "At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of governmental affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could not find any corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, 'We will never find any basis for charges against this man, Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God.'" So they tried to find something that they could bring against Daniel, but they couldn't find anything except his devotion to his God. And so that what they did is they went to the king and they told the king, said, "Hey, listen, here's what we want to do. Since you're newly in charge, let's take the next 30 days and everybody has to worship you. And you can make a decree that if they don't worship you, they get thrown in the lion's den." And the king says, "Well, that sounds great to me. Who doesn't want to have a whole month dedicated to the worship of themselves?" All right? And so the decree was made. But here's the deal with the decree. The decree was final. In this culture, in this context, when the king made a decree, you couldn't go against the decree. And so when God raises you up, expect people to try to tear you down. So what happens? This decree is made. And what does Daniel do to stand up in this context? This is so amazing to me, because if we pick up in verse 6, it says this: "Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs where the windows were open towards Jerusalem. And 3 times a day he got down on his knees and he prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before." A decree made. if you don't worship Darius and you worship any other god besides Darius as the king, you get thrown in a lion's den and devoured by hungry lions. Daniel's response in this to stand strong is to do exactly what he had done before. He didn't hide from the decree. He didn't go home and hide behind. He didn't shut his doors. He did exactly what he did before. Listen to me. Number 2, kneeling to pray is what will give you the strength to stand. Kneeling to pray will give you the strength you need to stand. Daniel prays to God and thanks him and expects that God is going to rescue him from this particular instance. And so here's how the story goes. Now, the administrators go, and what do? They catch Daniel praying because he's praying in front of all the open doors. They catch him praying, and they arrest him immediately. And what's interesting about this particular story is that when a decree was made, the punishment was immediate. The day Daniel was caught was the same day he was going to be thrown in the lion's den. And that is wild to me. And so as we look at the story in chapter 6, the king is upset now because the administrators have come and said, look, Daniel has committed this crime against you. You have to put him in the lion's den. And so the king is distraught. He's trying to figure out how he can get around this because he just promoted Daniel and he's fond of him. And so he's trying to figure it out. But in this culture, the law needed to be executed immediately. So Daniel that evening is going to be in the lion's den. And so he's trying to figure out how he's supposed to get Daniel out of the lion's den, but he can't do it. He can't figure it out. So Daniel goes into the lion's den. Oh, that is wild. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continuously, rescue you." And then a stone was placed in front of the lion's den, and it was sealed with the king's signet ring. This was interesting when I was studying this passage in Scripture. They would roll a rock in front of it, and then they would put chains, and each one of the chains had the king's name on it, his signet ring, and they would put some kind of clay over the chains, and it would seal, so that if anybody came to that lion's den, they would know that if they touched that stone, they would be killed very shortly after. And so Daniel's thrown into this lion's den. There is no way out. He is basically toast. And so, which leads me to point number 3. When you do what is right, you can always trust God with the results. When you do what is right, you can always trust God with the results. Now the story goes kind of like this. The king goes to sleep. He has a restless night. He gets up the next morning and he's running to see if Daniel is still alive, right? And so in verse 19 it says, "At first the light of dawn, the king got up, hurried to the lion's den, and when he came near the den, he called to Daniel in anguish and said, 'Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continuously, been able to rescue you from the lions?'" Wow. What's interesting to me is that the king understood that Daniel had a very, very devoted relationship with God. And he was almost in anticipation that God was going to save him, but he just wasn't quite sure. And so the king gets there and he says this statement, and he's so hoping that Daniel's still alive. And sure enough, Daniel answers, "May the king live forever, because my God sent his angels and he shut the mouths of the lions, and they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done anything wrong before you, your Majesty." You know what's interesting in this particular story is that Daniel was thrown in a lion's den, and these were hungry lions. And the Lord comes and visits him. So he is in a den of lions with the prospects of being eaten alive, but he ends up spending all night with an angel and wakes up the next day unharmed. Listen to me. When you do what is right, you can always trust God with the results. So listen to me. Let's finish up with just these few thoughts. Here's the deal. 3 truths to help you stand strong. When God raises you up, people are going to try to tear you down. Number 2, kneeling to pray gives you the strength to stand. And when you do what is right, you can always trust God with the results. Hey, let's finish with some questions. Where in your life do you need to stand strong? Number 2, how have you seen the power of prayer give you the strength to stand strong? And finally, what steps will you take this week to stand strong? Hey, it was so good to talk to you this evening. I look forward to seeing you next Friday in another restaurant. See you later. Stand strong. Peace.